So welcome back, everyone. We're going to start the economic update. My name is Sarah Do. I'm a fellow with the Indonesia project. It's my pleasure to chair the economic update today. So we're going to have two speakers for the update, McLeod and Sitta Rosdaniah. So McLeod is, I guess everyone knows him already. He's a long member of the Indonesia project. He's an adjunct associate professor now with Crawford School. His main research areas is on public economics and financial economics, and recently on economic reform of the public sector. And the second speaker is Sitta Rosdaniah. Sitta has received a PhD from ANU, also economist, and she's now the financial and supporting director of Jakarta Industrial Estate, Palung Gadung. And then our discussant is Olivia. Olivia is also economist at the economic department of University of Waikato, a senior lecturer. Susan has taught at Melbourne Uni and Monash. One of her specialties, a lot of people know that, is on big data and machine learning, very cutting edge. So without further ado, we'll welcome Ross to start the update.
Why are you all still here? The sexy part has already happened. This is only the economics section. Surely you've got it wrong. Thanks very much, Sarah, for the introduction. Sitta and I are going to be giving you some of our thoughts on current economic policies. We started out with a list of about 10 of these to look at, and the longer time has gone on, the more we realise that that's not going to fit, so we're only going to talk about 2. But that's just the way it is. Having looked at a number of economic policies, we'll be actually writing that story up, and the story will appear in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies in the December issue this year. But we've sort of come to the view that economic policy making in Indonesia is characterised by a distrust of the market mechanism and the private sector, and the corresponding preference for the government to determine economic outcomes. Our personal preference is for much greater reliance on private sector and markets. I'm sure this will be no surprise to many of you here. But I want to stress that the choice is not either or. It's not markets or government. Both sides have important roles to play, and we simply advocate strongly that the government should focus on doing the things that markets can't do at all or can't do very well. In this presentation, we're going to look at 2 cases of economic policy, one macro and one micro, and we're suggesting that there could and there should be a much bigger role for government to play in both, for markets to play in both of these areas. So, the sort of general theme is distrusting the market, and I'm going to start off talking about macroeconomic policy. When I went to Indonesia a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, things were going along pretty quietly, and I was fully intending not to say very much about macroeconomics, but the longer I was there, the more I realised this is the topic of the moment. And the reason for that is that the current account deficit has been growing quite rapidly, and the exchange rate has been depreciating considerably. So just to make life interesting, I've got a comparison here of the numbers for the 3rd quarter of last year, the September quarter, and the 2nd quarter of this year, the June quarter. And the current account deficit has gone from 4.6 billion, that's US dollars, to about 8 billion. And this has certainly caught people's attention. Now, I'm sorry to turn this into a bit of an economics lecture, but we do need to understand some of these key terms. So the balance of payments, it's just a listing of all the transactions of Indonesia with the rest of the world within a given time period. And the balance of payments, because it's a double entry accounting statement, credits equal debits, the total adds up to 0. So this black line in the middle here That's the balance of payments, it's zero. But we divide all of these transactions into current ones and capital ones. The current ones are here on the bottom line. So this is the current account deficit. In rough terms, it's imports less exports. And on the above the line, we're looking at the capital account surplus, and that is all the financing transactions that make the current account deficit possible. And you can see, as I said before, during this time period, the CAD, I'll just call it the CAD, has gone from about $5 billion to about $8 billion, much to everybody's surprise. And because these two things are equal, the current account surplus has grown by a similar amount. So now we need to ask, why did this happen? And we'll start by looking at the domestic context for this big change in the balance of payments. And the fact is that everything has been going along really quite nicely. There haven't been very many major concerns. If we look at the growth rate, I'm very sorry I don't have any beautiful photos like Tom had. All I can offer you is a weak economist's substitute of a bunch of graphs. So here we're looking at the growth rate of output of the economy, GDP. That's in percent terms. These are the numbers. In the latter years of SBY, you can see this was sliding. It had gone from above 6 to about 5. Since the new administration has been in place, that slide has been stabilised. There's a slight upward trend there, but I wouldn't get too excited about that. If we look at investment spending, it's very volatile compared with GDP. You see there's some high growth times, some low growth times. There was a high growth period second half of last year, and well, it was the second half of last year, but it's a bit disappointing that there's been this big decline more recently. If we're looking at inflation, another one of the indicators of how well the economy is being managed, it's very comfortably down at a level of about 3 to 4%, and everybody's happy with that. That's about the target, the official target. No problems there. The budget deficit, well, it's not tiny, but it's inside the legal limit, which is 3% of GDP. It was increasing quite rapidly, but under the current administration, that's been stabilised. It's now about 2.5% of GDP. This is what's been catching people's attention there, just this little upturn in the rate of depreciation. I've given you a fairly long period here to look at, just so that we can see this in historical context. You can see that up until the beginning of this year, we had a flat period. The exchange rate was quite stable, and everybody was fine. But now they're getting upset about this depreciation again. But if you look back in history, there's a long period here where the rate of depreciation was similar, quite high, didn't cause any major problems. So the sort of message that I want to get across is nothing much to see here, folks. Don't get too upset about things. In fact, if you look at the exchange rate of the rupiah against the Australian dollar rather than the US dollar, you get quite a different picture. So this tells us that, in fact, it's not weakness of the Indonesian rupiah, it's strength of the US dollar that's happening. And so Australia is having exactly the same experience. Hal's nodding over there because he told me to put this graph in. And I'm glad I did. So from our Australian perspective, the rupiah is not weak at all. We're just running along similarly. The problem, well, it's not even a problem, but the US dollar is strong. If we look at share prices, once again, this year there's been a significant decline in share prices on the stock exchange. But then again, if you take this long-term perspective, it's just another cycle. You know, you get prices going up for a while, then they fall back. They go up for a while more, they fall back. There's a general upward trend over time, but it just gets interrupted every now and then. So the recent slowdown is not dissimilar to what we've seen before. So the domestic context doesn't tell us very much. It doesn't really explain why we've seen this big change in the balance of payments. So now we have to look and ask, well, what's happening in the global context? And probably most of you will be familiar with this already. The fact of the matter is that interest rates in the US have been increasing slowly after being at very low levels for some times. And that tends to reduce capital inflow into Indonesia because people are thinking, well, let me invest in America now that interest rates are going up there. Another thing that's happening at the moment is that a couple, probably more than 2 countries are undergoing periods of very bad macroeconomic management in their own economies, which is causing their currencies to depreciate very rapidly. And this has unfortunate, it gives us an unfortunate reminder in the Indonesian case, because if you go back to Thailand in July of 1997, everybody thought Thailand was fine, but then suddenly it depreciated its currency by about 18% without anybody expecting that to happen. And that generated a kind of herd mentality, and everybody started speculating against the currencies in Southeast Asia. So people worried that the same thing might happen again because of what's happening in Turkey and Argentina. We've also got this threat of a global trade war generated by our favourite foreign president, whose picture has already graced the screen today, so I won't talk more about that. But that brings the possibility of a reduction in Indonesia's exports to the rest of the world. So to summarise all of that, both the current account and the capital account, that is capital inflow, seem likely to weaken in the near future. So the question for the policymakers is how best to respond. Again, I have to give a little bit of an economics lecture here. Let's just try to figure out what are the logical consequences of reduced capital inflow. That's certainly what is happening, but we want to know, well, what does that do to the economy? Capital inflow is also known by economists under the name foreign saving. It's just foreigners lending to Indonesia or investing in Indonesia to make investment possible there. So if we look at total physical investment that's going on all the time, it is limited by all of the savings that are available. There are 3 components. There's household savings, that's you and me not spending all of our income but saving some of it. That's government saving, that's if the government happened to be running a budget surplus, it's actually more likely to be running a deficit, and so that item will be negative. And then you've got foreign saving, that's capital inflow, and it's equal to the current account deficit, the difference between imports and exports. So, bottom line is, if foreign saving is falling back, which it is, then investment in Indonesia is also going to be reduced. Just to specify exactly what I mean by investment, it means investment in physical capital. It means constructing new buildings, installing new machinery and equipment, buying vehicles, building infrastructure, roads, electricity supply networks, and so on. So if we've got a reduction in the foreign capital inflow, then the implication of that is that investment goes down, and so we won't be able to build up the capital stock as quickly as we would have been able to do. But the important point is here, this is the really important point, this phenomenon slows down the growth of the capital stock. It does not decrease the capital stock. Why is this important? Because the capital stock is what we use to produce things, and by producing things we generate income. So we use capital, we use land, and we use labour to produce things. As long as the capital stock is not falling, then there is no negative effect on output of the economy. Even if we had a total reversal of capital inflow, this would not reduce GDP, and therefore it would not reduce capital income. So the story that I want to tell today is that if there is any danger of major disruption in Indonesia at the moment, I believe that comes from the threat of poor policy responses rather than anything inherent in the fact that foreigners are deciding to invest less in Indonesia. So what has been the response of the authorities? I guess the main, the main authority is the central bank, Bank Indonesia. Here's a quote from the Wall Street Journal just 10 days ago. The central bank has repeatedly intervened in currency and bond markets to defend the currency. That statement is not precisely correct. Well, I suppose it is. It's intervening in the currency markets by selling foreign exchange to try to stop the exchange rate from depreciating. It's intervening in bond markets. It's actually intervening in a non-sensible way in bond markets. I might come back to that in a moment. Separately, the government, as distinct from the central bank, has tightened up the budget, the fiscal conditions, its fiscal policy. It's been increasing the import tax on more than 1,100 consumer goods. So Indonesia is going to solve its problems by imposing a tax on vacuum cleaner imports, amongst other things. The alternative to this kind of approach is to trust the market. That's the whole point that we're arguing today. Trusting the market in this case means doing nothing. So suppose the government didn't change the budget settings, suppose that Bank Indonesia didn't get involved in the foreign exchange market or the bond market, what would happen? Well, the deterioration in the balance of payments is going to cause depreciation. In fact, that's already happening. And the effect of that is good from a growth point of view because it makes exports more competitive, it makes import substitutes more competitive, and so you get a boost to the tradable goods industries in Indonesia. We get a stimulation of growth, and we get a reduction in the current account deficit, which is in fact what the government wants to see happening. Meanwhile, the reduced supply of foreign savings, in other words, funds for investment, is going to push up interest rates because firms still want to carry out investment. Now they don't have as much funds available to do that, so that's going to push up interest rates. It's entirely to be expected because global interest rates are going up at the moment because I guess the US is setting the pace there. Higher interest rates in this context are going to be a good thing. They're going to encourage more domestic saving, and they're going to help restore the relative attractiveness of Indonesia as a place to invest. So, in fact, Bank Indonesia has been doing this a little bit, increasing interest rates to match the increases in interest rates in the rest of the world. And that's all good. Final point to note here, if you do nothing, if you take this do-nothing approach as the way to go, just think about speculative capital inflow. That's part of what's going on at the moment. People are saying, I think the rupiah is going to depreciate, therefore I'm going to buy dollars now so that I can sell them next week or next month and make a speculative profit. Lots and lots of people and firms are doing that. Well, if you think about it, if we allow the depreciation to happen right now, then the game is over. It's too late to buy cheap and sell dear because it's already dear. Right? So the point about speculation is that it occurs when the central bank tries to hold the exchange rate at a level that nobody believes will be able to persist. So doing nothing means no need to come to the office tomorrow. Give yourselves a holiday. Stay out of the foreign exchange market. Don't sell down your international reserves to prevent depreciation. Let the depreciation happen. Secondly, stay out of the bond market. Don't go buying government bonds, as Bank Indonesia has been doing, because we don't really need to, nor should we be trying to keep interest rates down. We should be allowing reality to reflect itself, and the reality is that interest rates in the rest of the world are going up, and Indonesia really doesn't have any choice but to allow that to happen locally. If we do this, if we stay out of those two markets, then one of the consequences will be that there'll be no disturbance to money supply growth. The central bank supplies money or takes money out of the market. But if it's not in either of those markets, then we can just keep money growing nice and steadily, around about 10% per annum. That's basically what we've had for the last little while. And as we've seen, that has been successful in keeping the inflation rate low on target. And I'm suggesting that the government should also do nothing in the sense of continuing with its current budget. Are you going to sing this, Ruth? This is a line from one of my, well, a few lines from one of my favourite songs. Don't go changing. I love you just the way you are. So, I'm sorry. Throw that woman out. What we've got happening at the moment is simultaneous targeting of mutually incompatible objectives. The two objectives are to save the rupiah. It's a nonsense term, but I think it means to try to stop it depreciating. And we're going to try to reduce the current account deficit. My basic question is why? Why do you want to do those things? What we need is national income. We need income. That's what enables us to eat. We want more income. Now, the problem is that neither of those things has any clear relationship with national income. So what's the point of fiddling with them? Why don't we just let the market determine their levels? What are the consequences if we do fiddle with them? Well, it turns out that trying to stabilise the rupiah actually increases the current account deficit, right? So we want to hold the rupiah down, that's one objective, and we want to hold the current account deficit down, but in fact we push it up. Well, how does that work? Let me go back to this diagram that I had before. You can see these, the green blobs, they're just the same green blobs as I had before. But now I'm giving you a little bit more disaggregation of some of these numbers. If we look at the capital account, we find that there are actually two components. There's a blue component and a red component. What's that, Democrats and Republicans? I don't know. The blue component, I'm sorry. How do we go backwards? There we go. The blue component is basically privately driven foreign capital inflow. It's the rest of the world wanting to invest in Indonesia. And you can see back in the third quarter of last year, this was pretty big. It was $10 billion, roughly. But at the same time, the private sector was bringing money into the country. Bank Indonesia, bless its heart, was sending it out of the country. So the net result, this 5 here, is actually 10 coming in and 5 being sent out again by Bank Indonesia. The other name for that is building up international reserves. Lots of people think higher reserves are a good thing. But to me, when I see that, it just means that Bank Indonesia has just deprived the Indonesian economy of $5 billion worth of foreign savings, which could have been used for investment. So the net of those two figures is this 5. Now let's look at the most recent quarter, the June quarter, and we find that things have changed in two ways. First of all, the rest of the world has become less interested in investing and lending to Indonesia. It's cut its inflow from 10 right down to 4. Bank Indonesia, again, not happy with that. And so in this case, it wants to supplement the inflow of private capital, and it does so by repatriating its foreign reserves. In other words, it sells its international reserves. So we've got a big decline in what the rest of the world is sending here, and on top of that, we've got Bank Indonesia repatriating capital that it has overseas. So again, the sum of those two things turns out to be the capital account surplus, and by definition, the current account deficit is exactly the same as that. So this action of Bank Indonesia, to me, is what is responsible for the growth in the current account deficit. So I think we can say that the jump in the current account deficit recently was caused by that repatriation of capital on the part of Bank Indonesia, and that had the effect of increasing total capital inflow, even though portfolio investment by the rest of the world was declining. And so that's what led to the increase in the current account deficit. Bank Indonesia was doing this, selling off its international reserves, because it distrusted the market to set the exchange rate. That's the theme. Okay, let me just hurry on a little bit. We had an Indonesia update right here in this place way back in 21 years ago, and the discussant for the economics presentation, which was given by Sri Mulyani Indrawati, the current Minister for Finance. So the discussion said at that time, the authorities remain unwilling to allow the markets to determine the exchange rate and interest rates. This has led to the introduction of policies that reflect a crisis mentality and that seems to exaggerate greatly the magnitude of the crisis. And these policies are more likely to harm economic performance unnecessarily rather than to help the economy adjust to changing circumstances. And in all due modesty, I would have to say that that proved entirely correct. That's exactly what happened. The authorities at the time didn't trust the markets, and that led to disaster. The poor policy choices made at that time cost Indonesians about $50 billion, and they set back the development process by many years. And what really grieves me here is that in the intervening time, 10 years ago, we've had the global financial crisis. And nobody seems to have noticed, but Indonesia sailed through this without very much damage at all. There's a mild slowdown in the growth rate from about 6% to about 4%, but that was it. It recovered pretty quickly. Why? Because at that time, the authorities allowed the exchange rate to move quite substantially, which it did, and it came back again. They allowed interest rates to move quite substantially, which they did, but came back again. But bottom line, there was no great damage there. So to me, much of the policy discussion I hear in Jakarta is much more like the Asian financial crisis than the global financial crisis. And contributing to this crisis mentality, I read in the newspaper last week that a local restaurant chain is offering free meals to clients who can prove they've exchanged their holdings of US dollars for the alien rupiah. So when we're relying on restaurant chain owners to run our monetary policy for us, I think we're in deep trouble. So bottom line, the markets can manage adjustment to the changing global circumstances if they are allowed to do so. And that's all from my part. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sitta now. I just want to say something by way of a little bit of extra introduction of Sitta. Until recently, she had been given the task by her ministry, the Ministry of State Owned Enterprise, to run a small business in East Jakarta. It's called the Jakarta Industrial Estate at Pulau Gadung, and it was Indonesia's first industrial estate. And the estate sits on about 500 hectares in East Jakarta. And when you hear that, you start thinking, oh, what's the land worth? Well, the land's worth about 2,000 Australian dollars per square metre, and there's 500 hectares, and if you do the arithmetic, it turns out that that land, which Sitta until recently was managing, is worth about 10 billion Australian dollars. And that's about the same size as Qantas. So here I give you...
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Now I want to discuss.
We need to go forward a whole lot. Yeah, okay.
Now I want to discuss about the other case of distrusting the market. It's about managing the bureaucracy. So we are talking about the people behind the gun, the people behind the public policy, so the implementers of the policy. When I go to some people and ask them about the bureaucracy, and most of their answer is corruptive. Yeah, people like to talk about corruption. And until now, Anti-Corruption Committee is still busy and keep busier, arresting civil servants from low to high level. And to date, it's about 2,350 active civil servants already named as the suspects of corruption. And lucky, I got the picture here. As we can see here, this guy, the smiling guy, is the Aceh governor when he was caught by KPK 3 months ago. But actually, talking the problem in the bureaucracy is not only about corruption. If we are talking about staffing, at least there are two important key matters. First is honesty, and the second one is competence. I know that the public right now keep watching to the bureaucracy, but it seems they put all their attention to see the violation of honesty which leads to the corruption. It's kind of sexy and interesting to see people put in jail, right? But on the other hand, the public seems to have less skepticism in the competencies of the bureaucracy. If only the honesty has got all attention and then the competencies are neglected, it seems that Indonesia cannot expect to be well governed. What does it mean? It means it will not fulfill its potential. Actually, in the private sector, like in the company that I work for, we really worry about honesty and the competence of our employees. But to cope with this problem, we rely heavily on the market processes in managing our workforce and management. Now, let me talk about the prices and competition in the human resource management. Practically, it's not complicated. Like in our daily life, when we want to buy things, we go to the market. We try to get lots of information to find the best combination of price and quality. If I want to buy a new city car, I go to the market, Googling, and I find lots of information. I can go buying, like, let's say, a very robust and long-lasting car, BMW i3, which cost me about 70,000 bucks, or I can get a very standard one, Mitsubishi Mirage, which only cost me $12,000. So it's very simple and natural. We get what we paid. So if I give peanut, I will get a monkey. In Indonesia term, ada harga, ada rasa. Even in Japanese people say ono roso, ono rego. This one. Firms do the same things when they try to find workers and managers. They shop around to get as many as best applicants to fulfill the job in the firms. On the other hand, they prepare a payment for the best applicants that are likely to be offered to the best applicants by the competitors of the firms. Otherwise, these best people will work for the firm's competitor. And firms like the company I work, we also insist on good after-sales service. What does it mean? We insist on satisfactory performance on job. So for employees with low performance will face real consequence. They have no promotion or even dismissal. By shopping around, we can get a wide range of structure of wages and salaries. That is the prices of labor. And this price will guide us to the allocation of labor to the appropriate job. So we can get the best combination of skills and salaries on every position. And this system, combined with the reward and punishment system, provide the incentives for the employees to have honest and efficient behavior. For firms that are not efficient, that are paying attention to this system, they will be out from the competition world. The efficient firms will replace them. But how about the bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is the monopolist. So inefficient bureaucracy will be there forever. Even though we know that the bureaucracy doesn't have profit motives like firms, but we argue that the bureaucracy should or must have high commitment to the efficiency because the bureaucracy is an agent of the public. They have to serve the public, its customer, quality services. And we, as the public, have the right to expect what kind of serve. I expect a very safe environment around my house. I expect that the police keep monitoring our environment very well. But in fact, I have to pay satpam or private guard to keep my kampung very well. So inefficient bureaucracy leads to low level of quality service. For this reason, we argue that the bureaucracy should adopt what the private sector already done it. So the bureaucracy should use the private sector use in managing its workforce. Now, let me talk about human resource management in the bureaucracy. Based on our observation, there is a huge difference between the human resource management in the bureaucracy and the one in the private sector. When filling the position, a very reputable company like mine, we can attract like thousands of best applicants only to apply for one position. But let's see in the bureaucracy, let's imagine a ministry with only 300 staffs. And then if there is a vacant position, it's only like, let's say, 10 to 20 people will apply. So the pool of eligible applicants in the bureaucracy is very limited. And most of them come from inside the department. It's very rare come from outside department because for civil servants, it's very difficult to move from one institution to other institution. And what is more, frequently, the priority is given to the seniority rather than capability. Imagine the consequence if a football team were managed in this way. Let's pick Manchester United. It shop around the world, yeah, find best player, and it's willing to pay best price, like Paul Pogba. MU paid like 80 million pounds sterling just to keep MU playing in the competition and win. Let's imagine if MU use 50-year-old striker to play. Do you want to watch the game? It must be very boring and slow. Okay, when we look at the civil service law, actually, civil servants have the right of fair and reasonable salary. What does it mean? It should be no discrimination between people to choose the career in the bureaucracy and the people to choose the career in the private sector. And let's look the number. For here in the graph, for the green bars, it shows the salary of the public sector. And then the red bars represent the salary from the private sector. I took the data for the public sector salary from cross department and the private sector salary from the survey conducted by 4 human resource research center. We have low and high level of salary. Here, we assume that the lowest rank in the public sector, which is echelon 4, is roughly equivalent to the junior manager in the private sector, so as the highest rank. So there are 2 things to note here. As we can see clearly here, all the green bars always far below the red bars with a very enormous gaps. And then the second thing is the public sector salary structure is relatively flat, increased gradually with respect and compared with the private one with a high degree of progressivity. So it's very hard to get best people to go to the bureaucracy. Actually, competition inside the bureaucracy have been introduced since then, but it's inside the institution, not outside the institution. So, I'm sure that good citizens want to mengabdi pada negara, to be civil servant. But we cannot push these people too hard, too far, to sacrifice, to get lower, much more lower salary to work as a civil servant rather than higher salary they get in the private sector. So, without this mechanism, open job application and then market-based salary, we cannot get the best people to run the bureaucracy. I will give you two cases. For example, the first case I took from Harun. It's a study of Harun in 2003. It's called Public Sector Accounting Reform. Everybody just agreed that this reform was necessary. But the problem is we lack of the bureaucracy, lack of adequate professional accounting to do the reform. We cannot ask public administrators to do accounting, right? There are so many good accountants in the private sector, but their salary are far higher than in the bureaucracy. And for the result, this reform was not so successful, even though it's very important for transparency. And I argue that paying low salaries is an invitation to undesirable behavior. Let me give you one simple example. Public university academics. There are people with very well-educated background, professors, doctors, masters, but their salaries are way below private sector levels. So it's very common to see them to work for consultancy projects rather than lecturing or doing genuine research. I know it very well because my husband is a public university lecturer. So as the CFO of my family, I'm so happy if he will be paid from one of consultancy project at least 4 times higher than his teaching salary. So it's happened everywhere. I mean, this problem exists throughout the bureaucracy. If we try to solve this using the KPK approach, it will end up too many people in the jail. Let's see this. I took this photo from media, and this is the office of Malang Regional Legislative Council. How does it? Empty, because 41 out of 44 members are caught by KPK. So, in my opinion, it's better we focus on preventive action, preventing undesirable behavior or corrective action, rather than corrective action, putting corrupt people in the jail. So, if we are serious in the bureaucracy reform to provide the best service to the public, get the best people, so we have to think that we have to trust the market and price to stop bureaucracy. Thank you.
Right. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to start by thanking ANU and Indonesia Project for inviting me to be a discussant. It is a real pleasure, delighted to be here. And then I'm also thanking Pak Ros and Sitta as well for providing us a very comprehensive and insightful survey. I'm actually at loss now what to say. I wish I can say, Pak Blaine, Ronit, and Greg, can I just go back to my seat? But I'm pretty sure that you guys are going to roll your eyes at me if I say so. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to make quite a few points. So for stimulating some question and discussion in the zone here. So let us start to try to look at the big picture. So it's kind of like this summarizing the overall performance of Indonesia economy for the last decades or so. You can try to look at what happened in here, like since the Asian financial crisis, Indonesia is actually doing quite well, right? So solid economic growth, depending upon which period you try to look at. we managed to have a growth around like 6.1% during the commodity boom season. And then in the last few years, the growth has been like stagnant around like 5.0%. So I have this new normal quotation. I borrowed this term from Ibu Mari Pangestu. I think, we were briefed last night, this kind of like general audience talk. Make sure they have to like come up with a sexy title to make sure the audience we do not put them into the sleep here. So if orange is the new black, is the slower economic growth is the new normal, okay? So overall, the big picture I want to like tell you here is that Indonesia actually has a good, solid economic growth performance. Of course, you know that like Sitta and Pak Ros mentioned here, so there's potential for Indonesia to like do better. I also like going to like touch upon quite a few things and what we can like, do better in that sense here. So like economic growth-wise, nothing to be worried about. Okay. And then in terms of like, quite a few like, current policy being put in place, the current government has been like, trying to like, put this pro-growth agenda. So one of them is investing a lot for the large-scale infrastructure development. And then even though that when you like, try to read the newspaper or the like, netizens said why the government is going to spending a lot of money in this infrastructure, creating a huge debt service in here. So let me just start by using the quote from the late former Margaret Thatcher. You and I come by road or rail, but economists travel on infrastructure. I think for most of us, we don't have that economics background. We can talk about, infrastructure is just a stock story. But there is a more beyond that story behind it because, we also like consider about the flow of the infrastructure. So when you think about in here, like Indonesia has been like, doing quite well. It's managed to like, pick up since the Asian financial crisis. What happened here that during that rapid growth period, because Indonesia do not have a good infrastructure to support that economic expansion. So we're having this supply bottleneck system. I wish that I have this picture about the traffic jam in Jakarta, but I thought, I'm going to like show the good image of Indonesia. I'm going to show you the nice thing that what has been like, done in the last few years in here. So I grew up in Indonesia. I'm from Medan, Indonesia, but over about the 20 years in Indonesia, I see that there is no improvement in the infrastructure, but only in the last few years, we see finally something that we can put Indonesia on the map in a good way. Right? So that is what the Semanggi, and then that is a new terminal in Jakarta, Terminal 3, so that's quite a good idea. And then the other problem in here is that economic infrastructure, that is very, very important. Because, for some of us, I'm from a development economics background in here, we know that if you need to like growth, if you need to sustain economic development, you need to have a good infrastructure. So the good infrastructure is not only the physical infrastructure, but also have this soft infrastructure like the human capital or the supply side in here. But since I show you the picture of this physical infrastructure, let me try to tell you a story that why we also need to put emphasis on the importance of putting some investment into the infrastructure, right? So what happened in here is that Indonesia, unfortunately or fortunately, we're such a large island country. Everyone is quite good, very hard to get the connection. So if we do not get this good infrastructure, how are we going to make sure that it's much easier to intertrade between the island here? Okay, so that's why now you cannot think of it, right? So currently Indonesia is doing well, but because our infrastructure is not that good, so that's why we don't have enough capacity to grow. So think, for example, when you talk about this blocked artery. So you really need your heart in order to be good, pump your system in here. But if your artery being blocked, then Houston, we have a problem. So the same thing in here, right? So if you want to growth, you need to stop the infrastructure because infrastructure is going to causing economic expansion, and the economic expansion also going to feedback loop in here. We need to have in good infrastructure. And then one of the things in here, if you do not have a good infrastructure, that means that your economic is very inefficient. Logistic-wise, it's going to quite costly. I think that what Sitta mentioned in here is going to no one is liking sitting in traffic for hours or hours just to deal with the traffic jam. So we need to do something about it, right? So if you, from foreign investor perspective, so if you know that Indonesia doesn't have a good infrastructure, so that is going to shy people away from investing money to your country, right? So we're talking about infrastructure, not only the road, electricity, for example. We have a good access to the electricity, but the quality of infrastructure in electricity is still not that great yet. A lot of power cut, all my friends complaining what the PLN is doing, so we wish that we have a constant electric power all the time here. So that's kind of a few examples, the importance of having good infrastructure. So the current government also have carried out quite a few fiscal reform and a credible monetary policy, and then also like improving the business climate. Some of these, I think that Pak Halwan mentioned to me before, the Indonesia government, they have this tendency to like come up with the good policy in a bad time, and then bad policy in a good time. But I think like in the last few years, there seems to be like tendency to converging toward the good policy in both bad time and good time. So you can see here, we can see some Indonesian sovereign rating lifted to investment grade or higher by all the major credit rating agencies. And then also they also try to reducing the red tape. So actually improving the business climate. For the first time ever, Indonesia ranking 72 out of 190 in the 2017 World Bank is doing a business survey, so jumping 42 places in just 3 years. So that's the top reformers in that sense. So that is good news, yay. Okay. And then that is another example. If you guys saw that one, that is Gelora Bung Soekarno-Hatta. So even though that we have tried to put a lot of money into the infrastructure, but the result speak for itself. So because Jakarta has put a lot of money, they put infrastructure, and then now that I think Jokowi, when they try to say, oh, that we are going to step up the game, we are also going to consider being the host for the Olympic Games in here. So I think that's what infrastructure is a good, putting Indonesia in a good way. So that is a good thing. Okay, so the next step in here is that people keep talking about debt. So the netizen talking about, oh, that is very, very bad. So think about from your own example in here. So avocado on toast is pretty much the story that when you're talking about buying your own house in Australia, right? So think of an example here. So if you want to buy your house, what are you going to do here? So I don't have a lot of cash in my money, all right? So in my bank account, so I need to find a loan from the bank. So having a debt is quite a good story because if bank is willing to give you a loan, that means that you are a credit-worthy person, right? So as long as having a debt is good, as long as you can manage it properly. So I think that the government is also going to do quite well as well. So Indonesia debt level are among the lowest in the world. So I mean that try to do this comparison study. So when you try to compare Indonesia with other developed countries, like India, Brazil, UK, Indonesia is still the debt level is much, much lower to this country. So that is still nothing to worry about, right? So I think that the problem here is that a lot of netizens in here, they don't really have a good solid econ 101 macros. I wish that Pak Ros or Ibu Sitta just gave a lecture on econ 101 to this netizen in here before they say something about that kind of half glass, half full empty story here. And then also that there's kind of a bit panic in the currency market because the Indonesia rupiah has been weakening. But this is nothing to do. There is, domestic market is not the only thing you also have to worry about because we have this financial contingent in Brazil or in Turkey here. But when they try to look at this depreciation, Indonesia is not doing that badly either, right? So if you compare the Indonesia depreciation about 5% compared to India rupiah 8.2, Turkish lira 38.5, or Argentina about 46% in here. So again, I also agree with the Pak Ros, you probably just let the market sort the things out itself, right? So we're happy where it is in here. I think that being from the speculative perspective, so I think people try to see, try to test the current the central bank whether that they are going to commit to do something about economy as well. So again, that's why we saw that the central bank has increased the interest rate by about 4 times already. But in the fact that even though what happened in Turkey and Argentina, again these two countries, they have kind of different story with Indonesia. So Indonesia has a good solid economic background, and then all this fundamental is pretty quite good. Okay. Again, and then I quite like story I love the way you are, just leave things where it is. But because the difficulty with Indonesia in here is that we are going to enter in the election season soon. So if you want just to leave it where it is, then it's going to be in the trouble, right? So also probably the policy perspective in here is going to be quite important of practicing the evidence-based policy making. Some people might going to say, oh, putting money on infrastructure is not good, but you probably want to look at, what would have happened if the government did not put money into building this infrastructure, right? So when talking about that Indonesia is an island region, logistics is quite hard, right? You kind of try to look at, if you do not worry about this interconnecting Indonesia, you kind of try to see the price of rice or cement is usually much, much cheaper in Java or in Sumatra compared to buy it from in Entebbe or Papua here. So that's kind of story why there's a huge regional disparity in the price or other thing as well. Okay. The way forward, so I also believe that they are the prospect for the higher growth. So I think the government in here is just have to focusing on the supply side. So that is improving the productivity. So Indonesia do have a demographic dividend, right? So they have, I think the government has to do something about it, improving the quality of wind, when we can fuel the growth for Indonesia. I also have kind of a bit of a bad story. So this is kind of the result from the PISA score. So Indonesia ranked 4, but not from the top, from the bottom. Right. So I think that's kind of creating the story that what Sitta also talking about, right? So there's kind of mismatching the skills between the firms and then the right candidate in here. So something to do about it. We know that SDA Impress has been trying to improve access to education, but access to education is one thing. The quality is also another thing as well. So we need to worry about that the quality also matters. Maybe that we can also try to do this business-based invention. Oops. Okay. So we know that we kind of living in the kind of digital era economy here. So we might be able to try to use something about it in a good way here. So for example, I just give example mainly from Africa country. So this is Ethiopian commodity exchange. So the small farmer or trader, they has been utilizing this internet platform, try to find the best prices. So can they find the good, the right buyer and seller in here. And then this is another story, is what we call it as an M-Pesa. So M-Pesa is kind of mobile money service where you just virtually save your money into the account, and then you can do transfer between account holder. So this is kind of just quoting the study by the Tafnet Suri and Jack, published in the 2016 Science here. So the spread of mobile money had raised at least 194,000 Kenyan households out of extreme poverty and induced about 185,000 women to switch into business or retail as their main occupation. So in a way that technology is quite good when you can do something innovative and then improving the people welfare here. And then again, there's kind of echo that what has been said from Pak Ross and Ibu Sitta as well. We also need to have this kind of private sector involvement. So with this example that I gave it to you here, the M-Pesa here is actually the private connection. So that's actually run by the Vodafone. So we probably need to see, government probably have to see something. If there is a capacity for the private sector to do it, so just let the private sector to do it, especially if can do it more efficiently here. Okay, right. So that is what I'm going to say here. So it's kind of what happened in Indonesia these days, because people like to send information either through Facebook, Twitter, or chatting application or WeChat in here. But the problem in here is that sometimes that you are not really sure that what is the truth of the information. So I think that we are quite lucky for most of us in this room, we kind of know how to filter the correct information, what is the incorrect information. So again, that maybe something that needs to be done in this kind of area. And so just do not trust easily. So kind of think of this as a half glass, half full story. So you might want to try to look at what is the truth of this story. Maybe just if some of you like us economists, we're hungry for the facts. So let's try to find the facts, find what is rational behind it, whether that is true or not, and then make a decision, not just spreading the false information or fake news in here. So I think let me just to stop here, and then thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you for speakers and discussants for a very lively and interesting discussion. So now we'll invite questions. So can I just say, please, if possible, can you stand up? And also say who is the question for among the speakers and discussant. Can Lydia? we have some media, social media questions, so maybe we'll start with that. Just for Lydia at the front, a microphone.
This is a question coming from the live stream from somebody watching, I think, in Melbourne through Facebook. Eddie Ridwan is asking, is distrust of the market and wishing to control the current account deficit and interest rate at all related to the upcoming elections and the need to avoid perceived economic stability? That's to Pak Ros and Sitta. And also, if you think that there are potential economic directions different between the two presidential candidates.
Is that Ross or Sitta? That's, I think that's all the media questions, so please we'll maybe just start with that.
Yes, Susan also mentioned the upcoming election, and all of my political science colleagues here, they all love democracy, but it's not an unalloyed good, you know. It does have its downsides, and you know, we see it in Australia, we see it in Indonesia. It's difficult for us clever economists to get our good policies accepted because the people out there, they just won't believe us. So that's certainly a problem. But you know, so if you're in the position of Jokowi at the moment, okay, you got this election coming up, and Prabowo is already beating him over the head because the rupiah is depreciating and the CAD is getting bigger and so on. So up until now, they've been trying to stand against that, not allowing this to happen. But I'm afraid there's a sort of trade-off here. It's sort of on one hand or the other. There's a possibility that by trying to stop what is kind of inevitable, Jokowi or his government and the central bank will actually create an even bigger problem. Because as I was saying before, a lot of what's happening now is speculative activity against the rupiah, and speculation thrives on the idea that the central bank doesn't know what it's doing. It's trying to defend an exchange rate of 15,000, but I think it's going to go to 17,000 or whatever number you want to pluck out of the air. If enough people believe that, then that's what's going to happen, and the central bank won't be able to stand up against that. And then you'll have a real problem. So there's a dilemma here. If they do let interest rates and exchange rates go, as we're advocating, that will be kind of uncomfortable. But as I said, you know, a depreciation stimulates growth. It stimulates every firm that's in the tradable goods sectors. That ought to be a selling point for that sort of policy. So I think there's certainly a problem there, and I think the government has kind of painted itself into a corner rather unnecessarily by sort of building up the problem instead of saying it's not really a problem. You know, we're just the same as Australia. Their exchange rate has been depreciating just like ours, and we're not panicking in Australia. The second question was asking if I see different economic directions from the two candidates. Frankly, I don't. I don't think it's an election about policies. I think it's about identity politics, and it's just about trying to get into office. But frankly, I don't see much, if any, difference between the two candidates as far as their economic positions are concerned.
I'll take more questions. There's one here, and anyone, yeah, one in the middle. Is there anyone from the right-hand side? If not, let's just start with these two. So this gentleman in gray is a microphone.
Is this?
Oh, yeah,
am I the
sorry.
gentleman in gray?
No, please start. Yes, sorry, I didn't see you.
Oh, okay, from the gentleman in gray. I would like to ask some questions about corruption, go back to the issue of corruption. of course, it's a major issue, right? But I think it has more to do with that there's no issue of shame or guilt attached to it, right? I mean, the whole discussions, as Ross also said, it's about identity politics. The identity of Indonesian citizens now is to be a good Muslim, right? And to be a non-corrupt good Muslim is not interesting, right? The MUI has never issued any fatwa on the topic, right? I mean, you cannot have short skirts, but if you're corrupt, no problem. And for instance, if you look at the case of the Malang councillors, right? Their salary is not so low, right? Honestly not. That it would need, this major corruption effort. And don't forget that a salary of a councillor like that is supplemented by enormous amounts of money as tunjangan, this, that, and the other, and things and so on. They are not poor, right? But they have no sense of shame, because even those who are now captured by KPK, they all seek re-election, right? So when you are caught as a corrupt official, you just duck a little bit, wait until it's over, and then you pop up again, and you start, because corruption is a business risk, right? Or getting caught is a business risk. Corruption is the normal way of living and trying to be a politician. And if you get caught, too bad, you wait until it's over. No, honestly, I think this is a serious moral issue also. It's not just a business issue. And of course, I mean, if you look at markets, a major problem or major absence in the whole negotiations on wages is there's hardly any labor movement, right? So I would argue instead for less democracy, for more democracy and a stronger labor union and more discussions on what a truly morally modern being of Indonesian citizens should be.
So can we go to the gentleman in gray now? Sorry.
Thanks very much for all three of your presentations. Those were very useful, especially for those of us who are non-economists and need the economics lessons. My name is Aaron Conley from the Lowy Institute. I just wanted to ask you, Ross, and perhaps Olivia, about the prospects for food price inflation. This is coming from a political perspective. Do you think that the depreciation in the rupiah, if it's not controlled, and the prospect for higher global oil prices in the next few months with U.S. oil sanctions coming on against Iran in November, do you think that there's a prospect for that to feed back into the economy in terms of food price inflation, particularly before 18 April 2019? Thanks.
And there's one at the back.
My question was just about infrastructure. So do you think that the free market or the government actually has a bigger role to play with infrastructure?
Sorry, can you repeat it? We didn't really.
Do you think that the free market or the government should play more of a role in constructing the infrastructure in Indonesia?
Right, free market in infrastructure. So, Ross or Sitta, we start with the democracy and then the depreciation.
Well, okay, Aaron, thank you for your question. It's more technical than I can handle, I think. Food price inflation. Yes, food is a tradable commodity, so if there is a depreciation, we would expect its price to go up. And I guess that's why we'd hope this problem goes away fairly quickly. I think it's kind of useful to go back to the global financial crisis 10 years ago. Indonesia at that time faced a very traumatized global situation. And as I said, it responded to that, in my view, correctly by allowing the exchange rate to depreciate and allowing interest rates to move. And these were quite big movements. And somehow or other, They managed to let the exchange rate go, and it didn't cause any major problem with food price inflation. The interest rates didn't cause any major problem of any kind. There was a minor slowdown of growth. So I think sort of in principle, yes, there would be an upward impact on food prices, but I don't think we should get too carried away about that. I'm kind of doing a hand-waving thing rather than basing that on any solid evidence. The higher global oil prices are a problem in the sense that Indonesia is this wealthy country. It's got this wealth of natural resources, and the government's responsibility is to get the most value out of those resources for its people. Unfortunately, for the last many years, it's had this policy of subsidising the consumption of petrol. That just means that it's using its own natural resource very wastefully. And so I think as time goes by and the global oil price goes up and up, you're just going to find the subsidy to consumption of fuel going up and up and up. It's not so much a budgetary problem because the government is winning on one side of the budget. It gets more revenue from the oil sector, but then it gives it away in subsidies. But it's certainly a problem in terms of being wasteful. And Jokowi has sort of shown this already. One of the first things he did when he came into power was to increase fuel prices, cut the subsidies enormously, and that has made possible very big spending on infrastructure. And the results of that are tangible. I was just there and I'm kind of blown away by the amount of infrastructure development that's been going on. So I'm not too worried about those two things. The question about whether the government or the market should run infrastructure investment. I think we're very keen on the idea of getting much greater market involvement or private sector involvement in infrastructure. If we're talking about roads, then specifically toll roads, I think toll roads are wonderful things because they make users pay for what they are using. By doing so, we get a balance between the cost of provision and the benefit to the people that are using it. In doing so, we generate a whole lot of revenue with which we can build some more roads, and we can invest in more hospitals and schools and so on. People have shown in Jakarta that they're very willing to pay for the use of roads because when the 3-in-1 policy was in operation, they used to have to pay to get a jockey to ride with them so that they'd fulfill the 3-in-1 condition. Now, Sitta has written in her PhD thesis that it would have been so much better if that extra 10,000 rupees or whatever it was going to the government to be reinvested in infrastructure rather than just being wasted on paying people to do work which is of no value whatsoever. I think I'll hand over to you to deal with the morality of corruption. I know nothing about morality, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm also surprised that there is no fatwa about corruption at all. So rokok or smoking, there's fatwa about that, but no other fatwa about corruption. So it's pity. I really want to have it. But you're correct that sometimes corruption is about morality. For greedy people, we cannot just, even though they are paid like a very high salary, so we have two, competencies and also honesty. So we have to handle both of the, but in the private sector, we are very strict in the contract. So reward and punishment is there. But if we are talking about legislative, senators, whatever, parliament, and that the people elect this, the members of the consultative. So the people should more skeptic how to choose the best candidate in the maybe next year. So they have to get the idea from the private sector as well, check them, honesty and also the competencies as well. And for me, cutting incentive for corrupt behavior will result in large savings in procurement. Right now, I got the data probably in the written paper we can edit, and that will be much more tax revenue collection. And the system should be reformed, so the well-functioning bureaucracy will pay for itself. Let's say, right now, for preparing some occasion, we have to do 5 times meeting or study banding, and then they're so inefficient. So probably, if we can also make it smaller, I mean the bureaucracy as well. So again, for corruption, it's not, we cannot control from the economic side. We need more discipline to do that, probably religious studies as well. You want to add this?
On that note, I'm sorry we have to conclude the economic update. Please join me in thanking all the speakers and discussants.